You have been calling it dissatisfaction because the truth would demand too much from you. You have been telling yourself that you are tired, distracted, ungrateful, or temporarily lost. You have blamed your circumstances, your lack of discipline, the people around you, and even your own inability to appreciate what you once worked so hard to build. But beneath all of these explanations, something more disturbing has been forming. Your old life has not suddenly become unbearable. You have become too psychologically large to continue living inside it without injuring yourself. Carl Jung spent decades studying this precise moment. He understood that the psyche does not always announce transformation through inspiration. Sometimes it begins through irritation, sometimes through numbness, sometimes through the quiet horror of realizing that the life which once protected you has become the structure that now confines you. This reaches you before that structure finally breaks. You may still be functioning. You may still answer messages, meet obligations, smile at the right moments, and maintain the appearance of continuity. Nothing may look dramatically wrong from the outside. That is what makes this stage so difficult to explain. Your life still works according to the standards by which other people measure a life, yet it no longer works according to the truth emerging within you. You feel the discrepancy everywhere. A conversation that once comforted you now leaves you strangely depleted. A goal that once motivated you now feels like a task assigned to someone you no longer are. A room you once wanted begins to feel airless. You arrive at places and wonder why you agreed to come. You hear yourself speaking and sense that the person using your voice is repeating a role from memory. You may be tempted to dismiss these experiences as moods. You may even fear that something is wrong with your capacity for connection, ambition, or gratitude. But what you are feeling is not necessarily the disappearance of meaning. It may be the withdrawal of meaning from forms that have completed their psychological purpose. Jung called this movement part of individuation, the lifelong process through which you become less governed by inherited expectations and more capable of living from the totality of your own psyche. Individuation is often misunderstood as self-improvement. It is not. It does not simply make you more confident, productive, peaceful, or socially impressive. It dismantles your unconscious loyalty to identities that once made your life manageable. That dismantling can feel like failure. Your old identity was not false in every sense. It helped you survive particular conditions. It earned approval, created predictability, reduced conflict, and gave you a recognizable place in the world. You may have become the responsible one, the agreeable one, the achiever, the caretaker, the rational one, the calm one, or the person who never needed too much. That identity solved a problem. The problem is that you kept living through it long after the conditions that created it began to disappear. A woman sits at the edge of her bed after work, still wearing her coat. Her phone lights up beside her, but she watches it ring until the screen goes dark. She is not angry with the person calling. She simply cannot tolerate hearing herself become cheerful again. When she finally removes her coat, she does it slowly, as though undressing from a character she has performed all day. The danger is not that you have changed. The danger is that you will continue forcing your changed psyche to inhabit an unchanged life. When the unconscious begins withdrawing energy from an identity, the conscious mind rarely understands what is happening. You experience the withdrawal as fatigue, indecision, loss of motivation, or emotional distance. You try to restore yourself by becoming stricter. You create new routines. You consume advice. You push harder against the invisible resistance. But the resistance is not always asking to be defeated. Sometimes It is the psyche refusing to finance its own disappearance. Jung observed that psychic energy moves toward what the personality needs for development. When an old role no longer serves that development, the energy invested in it begins to recede. This does not happen because you are weak. It happens because the psyche has priorities that do not always match the ambitions of the conscious ego. The ego wants continuity. The psyche wants wholeness. Continuity feels safer because it preserves your agreements. It allows people to recognize you. It keeps your place in systems that depend on your predictability. Wholeness is more dangerous. Wholeness may require you to disappoint people who benefited from your fragmentation. That is why this stage often begins with exhaustion. Your exhaustion may not come from doing too much. It may come from maintaining too many psychological divisions. You say yes while feeling no. You offer warmth while suppressing resentment. You perform certainty while living in confusion. You encourage others while privately grieving the life you have postponed. Every division consumes energy. Jung understood neurosis not simply as illness, but often as the suffering produced when two incompatible truths demand expression within the same person. One part of you wants to preserve belonging. Another part wants to stop betraying itself. One part remembers what your life cost to build. Another knows that staying may cost even more. A man sits in his car outside his house with the engine turned off. The porch light is on. Through the window, he can see familiar movement inside, but he does not reach for the door handle. He scrolls through nothing on his phone, not reading a single word. He is not avoiding the people inside. He is delaying the moment when he must become the version of himself they expect. What you have been calling tiredness may be the accumulated cost of returning to yourself only in private. The persona begins to suffocate when you mistake it for your identity. Jung used the word persona to describe the social face you develop in response to the world. The persona is necessary. It allows you to participate in society, fulfill responsibilities, and communicate across different situations. But it becomes dangerous when you forget that it is a mask and begin treating it as the full extent of who you are. You learn to receive love through your persona. Perhaps you were praised for being easy to manage. Perhaps you were admired for your strength. Perhaps people valued your intelligence because it kept emotion at a distance. Perhaps your usefulness became the foundation of your belonging. Over time, you stopped asking whether people loved you or merely loved the consistency of what you provided. The persona then became more than a social tool. It became a psychological contract. You promised to remain recognizable. Others promised to keep giving you a place. Now your deeper life is violating that agreement. A daughter sits at the kitchen table while her mother explains what she should do next. She nods at the familiar points and folds the corner of a paper napkin again and again. She already knows she will not follow the advice. Still, she cannot bring herself to say it. When she leaves, her mother believes they have agreed, and the daughter feels the old ache of having disappeared without physically leaving. What you call confusion may be the moment your persona loses the authority to make decisions for your whole life. The old life often survives because it is reinforced by other people's memories of you. You are not only living inside your routines, you are living inside expectations that have gathered around your previous choices. Every role you repeatedly performed taught people how to approach you. They learned what you would tolerate, what you would carry, what you would forgive, and how little space you would require. When you begin changing, they may not respond to who you are becoming. They may respond to the disturbance your growth creates in the system. Jung saw the family and collective environment as powerful carriers of unconscious patterns. A system develops its own balance, even when that balance depends on one person remaining small, silent, overburdened, or emotionally available. Your transformation threatens that arrangement because it redistributes psychological responsibility. You stop rescuing, and someone must face the consequences of their own choices. You stop agreeing, and someone must tolerate disagreement. You stop translating everyone's emotions, and the room becomes uncomfortable. A friend reads a message twice before replying. The words are simple: "I cannot do that this weekend." She adds an apology, deletes it, then adds it again. Her thumb hovers above send. When the reply arrives, it contains only one word, "okay," but she spends the next hour imagining anger behind it. What you interpret as guilt may be the sensation of leaving a role that trained everyone, including you, to experience your boundaries as betrayal. Your discomfort is not proof that you are making the wrong choice. Sometimes discomfort is the nervous system adjusting to a form of honesty it was never permitted to practice. The shadow grows wherever your acceptable identity refuses to look. You may believe your shadow contains only aggression, envy, selfishness, or shame. But Jung's concept of the shadow includes every quality you were required to disown in order to preserve your preferred self-image. Your vitality may be in the shadow. Your ambition may be there. Your anger, sexuality, creativity, authority, grief, and capacity to refuse may all have been exiled because they threatened the identity that kept you loved. The old life cannot contain you because it was built around your partial self. It was designed for the version of you who could function without certain truths. Perhaps you built a relationship while disconnected from your anger. Perhaps you chose a profession while separated from your creativity. Perhaps you shaped your social world around the need to be approved of. Perhaps you created an entire life while believing that safety mattered more than aliveness. The shadow does not remain passive forever. It begins appearing through fantasies you judge, impulses you suppress, resentment you rationalize, and attraction to lives you pretend not to want. It speaks through the people who irritate you, because they embody qualities you have forbidden in yourself. It appears in dreams where doors will not open, houses contain unknown rooms, or you are trying to leave but cannot find your belongings. A quiet employee watches a colleague challenge a decision during a meeting. She immediately judges him as arrogant. Later, alone at her desk, she replays his words and feels heat rising in her chest. She does not actually despise his willingness to speak. She despises how completely she has abandoned her own. What you call resentment may be admiration forced to live underground. You cannot integrate the shadow by becoming reckless. You integrate it by admitting that the qualities you condemned may contain energy your life now requires. Your anger may contain discernment. Your selfishness may contain self-preservation. Your impatience may contain knowledge that a cycle has already ended. The old life depends on your continued mistrust of these energies. If you trusted your anger, you might stop explaining what has already hurt you repeatedly. If you trusted your longing, you might admit that comfort is no longer enough. If you trusted your grief, you might finally accept that something is over. The psyche often creates symptoms when direct truth has become impossible. Jung did not treat symptoms as meaningless disruptions. He listened for the compensatory message within them, the unconscious attempts to correct the one-sidedness of conscious life. When you become excessively adapted to duty, the unconscious may produce fantasies of escape. When you identify only with strength, it may overwhelm you with vulnerability. When you organize your life around control, it may confront you with uncertainty. The symptom is not always the enemy. Sometimes it is the messenger you keep trying to sedate. You may suddenly lose interest in constant social contact. You may need more silence than before. You may become sensitive to conversations that feel performative, or environments that demand emotional self-abandonment. You may feel unable to tolerate noise, urgency, or shallow reassurance. This does not automatically mean that isolation is healthy or that every withdrawal should be obeyed without reflection. It means your withdrawal may have psychological content. It may be creating enough distance for you to hear something your previous life drowned out. A man agrees to attend a gathering, then cancels an hour before it begins. He sits on the floor beside his bookshelf and expects to feel ashamed. Instead, he notices relief moving through his body. He makes tea, leaves the television off, and hears the rain against the window for the first time that evening. What you have been calling antisocial may be your psyche protecting a conversation with yourself that has been interrupted for years. Withdrawal becomes dangerous only when it serves permanent avoidance. But temporary withdrawal can be essential when the personality is reorganizing. A seed does not break open in a crowded room. Psychic transformation often requires a protected interval in which your new values are not constantly corrected by people invested in your old ones. Your old motivations are dying before new motivations become clear. This is one of the most frightening parts of transformation. You expect the new life to announce itself before the old one loses meaning. Often, it does not. The old source of energy collapses first. The next direction remains hidden. Jung described transformation as a process that involves holding the tension of opposites. You do not rush to resolve the conflict prematurely. You remain conscious inside it. You allow the contradiction to generate a third possibility that the ego could not have designed in advance. This requires patience, but not passivity. You may know what no longer fits without yet knowing what should replace it. You may feel the false choice between returning to the old life and destroying everything impulsively. Neither is necessary. The deeper task is to resist forcing a premature identity simply to escape uncertainty. The ego hates the interval. It would rather choose a new label, philosophy, relationship, job, or destination than remain without a clear explanation. But the unknown interval is where the deeper personality begins arranging itself. Your previous ambitions must loosen enough for desires not based on compensation to become visible. A woman opens a document titled New Plan. She types 3 career options, deletes them, then closes the laptop. For several minutes, she sits without doing anything. Her hand reaches toward the screen again, but she stops. For once, she does not turn uncertainty into a task. What you call lack of direction may be the first period of your life in which you are not allowing fear to choose a destination for you. You are grieving an identity, not merely changing a lifestyle. This grief can be confusing because the identity may have caused you pain. You wonder why you miss a version of yourself you are trying to outgrow. But that version carried you. It absorbed pressures you were not yet capable of confronting directly. It protected relationships, secured belonging, and helped you survive periods when authenticity would have come at a cost you could not pay. You do not need to despise who you were. Jungian integration does not demand the destruction of the former self. It asks you to place that self within a larger consciousness. The agreeable part of you may still have value, but it can no longer govern every decision. The achiever may remain useful, but it cannot determine your worth. The caretaker may continue loving others, but not by treating self-erasure as virtue. Grief appears because you are ending an internal government. A man finds an old notebook while clearing a drawer. The pages contain goals he once pursued with complete seriousness. He smiles at one sentence, then unexpectedly begins to cry. He is not mourning the failure of those goals. He is mourning the person who believed achieving them would finally make him safe. What you feel as sadness may be gratitude for a self you can no longer remain. The new life will require qualities your old life taught you to fear. You may need to become more direct, more selective, less available, more willing to be misunderstood. You may need to tolerate being seen as changed, difficult, distant, selfish, uncertain, or disappointing. These labels may feel unbearable because your old identity was built to avoid them. The psyche does not ask you to become cruel. It asks you to stop using kindness as camouflage for fear. It does not ask you to abandon responsibility. It asks you to distinguish responsibility from compulsive self-sacrifice. It does not ask you to reject everyone from your past. It asks you to stop confusing history with obligation. Jung recognized that individuation separates you from the unconscious assumptions of the collective. This separation is not superiority. It is responsibility. You can no longer hide inside what everyone expects. You must become answerable for the life you knowingly continue to live. A woman listens as her partner describes the future they have always discussed. She notices that every detail sounds familiar, and none of it feels alive. Her mouth opens, but the usual reassuring sentence does not come. She says, quietly, "I do not know whether I still want that." The silence afterward feels longer than the relationship itself. What you call selfishness may be the first refusal to let another person build their future on your unspoken absence. Yet there is a deeper truth beneath all of this, and it is the one you may still be avoiding. Your old life may not release you gently. You may be hoping that everyone will understand once you explain yourself perfectly. You imagine finding the right words, the right timing, the right amount of evidence. You want your transformation to be approved by the very structures it will disrupt. That approval may never come. Some people will interpret your growth as rejection because your previous self made them comfortable. Some will accuse you of becoming cold when you stop overfunctioning. Some will call you unstable because they cannot imagine an inner change that does not have an external justification. Some will remind you of promises made by a version of you who had not yet encountered the truth you know now. You may lose more than routines. You may lose status, familiarity, financial certainty, social belonging, and the innocence of believing that honesty always improves relationships. Honesty does not always preserve relationships. Sometimes, it reveals what the relationship required you to conceal. This is the shadow beneath the shadow. You are not merely afraid of change. You are afraid that becoming yourself will prove that certain forms of love were conditional upon your self-abandonment. That possibility hurts because it reaches into your oldest adaptations. Perhaps you learned early that connection depended on compliance. Perhaps disagreement led to withdrawal, anger, ridicule, or punishment. Perhaps your nervous system learned that belonging could disappear the moment you became inconvenient. Now the adult part of you understands that you have choices, but the younger structure within you still experiences authenticity as danger. This is why you delay. You wait for certainty that cannot exist before the choice. You wait to feel no guilt. You wait for others to grant permission. You wait until the old life becomes so painful that leaving it can be framed as necessity rather than desire. But if you wait until you are completely unable to remain, the psyche may choose rupture for you. The body may stop cooperating. Resentment may harden into contempt. A relationship may become impossible to repair. A vocation may collapse under years of withheld energy. You may act impulsively, not because impulsiveness is your nature, but because every conscious form of change was postponed until the unconscious had to force movement. Jung warned against ignoring the unconscious, because what is not made conscious appears as fate. The life you refuse to examine does not remain still, it gathers pressure. You already know where some of that pressure lives. It lives in the message you postpone answering, because honesty would alter the relationship. It lives in the work you perform competently while something inside you goes silent. It lives in the private fantasy of disappearing, beginning again, or finally being unreachable. It lives in the resentment you feel toward people who ask from you what you have trained them to expect. The uncomfortable choice is not between keeping everything and losing everything. The choice is between participating consciously in your transformation or waiting for your transformation to occur through damage. Conscious participation will still cost you. It may cost you an identity you know how to perform. It may cost you the admiration of people who only recognize your usefulness. It may cost you the fantasy that every chapter of your life can be preserved indefinitely. It may cost you the belief that being good means never becoming a source of discomfort. There is no psychologically honest way to grow while guaranteeing that no one will feel your movement. You are allowed to stop translating your truth into language designed to make it harmless. You are allowed to stop presenting evidence for what you feel. You are allowed to stop treating exhaustion as a moral failure when it is produced by a life divided against itself. You are allowed to stop forcing enthusiasm for goals that belong to a former stage of your development. You are allowed to stop offering permanent loyalty to temporary identities. This permission does not remove responsibility. It deepens it. You remain responsible for how you speak, how you leave, how you set boundaries, and how honestly you examine your motives. You remain responsible for distinguishing genuine transformation from avoidance, projection, and impulsive escape. You remain responsible for seeking support when the process overwhelms your capacity to hold it alone. But you are not responsible for remaining psychologically unchanged so that others never have to confront your difference. You do not need to demolish your life tonight. You do not need to announce a new identity. You do not need to turn inner movement into a dramatic performance. The psyche often changes long before external circumstances can safely follow. What matters first is that you stop lying to yourself about what you know. You know what drains you because it requires disappearance. You know which conversations leave you smaller. You know which ambitions are powered by fear. You know where your yes has become a form of betrayal. Let that knowledge exist without immediately forcing it into action. The ego wants a conclusion. The deeper self asks for relationship. It asks you to listen long enough that change emerges from integration rather than revolt. It asks you to honor the old self without allowing that self to imprison the new one. Your old life was not a mistake. It was a container. It gave shape to a stage of your becoming. It held you while you learned what you could not have learned elsewhere. But a container becomes a prison when its preservation matters more than the life developing inside it. That is the accusation you were avoiding. You were not failing to fit your life. You were succeeding too long at fitting a life that required less of your truth. Now the walls feel closer because your consciousness is expanding against them. The discomfort is not proof that you are lost. It is evidence that the shape of your life and the shape of your psyche are no longer identical. Carl Jung understood that individuation is not the achievement of a perfect self. It is the gradual willingness to become accountable to the whole person within you. That whole person includes your contradictions, your grief, your anger, your tenderness, your uncertainty, and your unlived possibilities. You do not become whole by choosing one side and destroying the other. You become whole by refusing to let any single adaptation impersonate your entire identity. So do not curse the restlessness too quickly. Do not call the numbness meaningless before asking what it no longer wants to support. Do not shame the part of you that has stopped cooperating with your disappearance. This reaches you before your old life can no longer contain you, not to demand that you escape it immediately, but to help you recognize what is already pressing against its walls. The life you built may still deserve your gratitude. It does not automatically deserve your future. If this resonates, subscribe to The Waking Shadow, where we explore Jung's psychology for those walking the individuation path. Watch the video on your screen now for a deeper look at what happens when the psyche begins withdrawing from the person you used to be.